Good afternoon, Charles Moscowitz here. So, is there a grand conspiracy? Before I launch into a discussion of grand conspiracy, I want to mention that I am experimenting with live phone calls. You can join this program if you're watching live on one of our live venues. That includes YouTube, Facebook, Periscope, Twitch, and several others. And you can do that by calling 617 396 4830. 617 396 4830. And as I learn more about the tech aspects of this program, which is not my strong suit by any means, I hope to have the number up and displayed and figure out all those great bells and whistles that the good people do. I'm just kind of this kind of old guy who turns the thing on and hope it works. Anyway, you're welcome to call. So, is there a grand conspiracy? Well, first of all, the short answer to that, in my opinion, is no. There is no grand conspiracy in that you have a small group of people sitting around in some smoke filled room somewhere figuring out how to conspire to undermine freedom and create a one world government, which is generally the thesis of every conspiracy theory going all the way back to the days of Nimrod. Um, there is, in the broad sense, a conspiracy for one world control, but it's not quite so coordinated as to call it a grand conspiracy. It is what I think Whittaker Chambers referred to in his seminal autobiography, Witness, as what he called a conspiracy of gentlemen. In other words, you have people who think alike, people who are of a certain ilk. They're usually very wealthy, they're privileged, they have a sense of what used to be called noblesse oblige, that they somehow have a duty to control the world for its own good. These are people who generally have turned their back on God. They've turned their back on conventional notions of morals and ethics. They're into control and they're filled with this sense of conceit and ego that makes them think that they know better about how to run other people's lives than they know themselves. It's a conspiracy in that sense, and it's a conspiracy that goes back really to Nimrod, actually, or to even Cain and Abel. I mean, Cain entered into a conspiracy when he murdered his brother Abel. In a sense, Adam and Eve entered into a conspiracy, the founders of the human race, when they partook of the forbidden fruit, when they said we can be as God, we can be like God, we can know everything, we can know the universe. In other words, what the promise of the serpent in the Garden of Eden, who represents Satan, offered Eve was the ability to overthrow God in heaven. And when then she brought Adam into the conspiracy, that became a conspiracy. Because a conspiracy is when two or more people, actually I think it's three or more people, come together and seek and conspire to do something that is either illegal or unethical or immoral, and they try to do it either with an outright revolution, it's a plot, or they do it through subversion. They do it by pretending to be someone else, by fooling other people into thinking that something is A when in fact it's B. You know, they in other words, a conspiracy of lying, basically. And when Adam and Eve partook of the forbidden fruit, they entered into a conspiracy against nature, a conspiracy against God, and they were punished for it. God basically removed them from the Garden of Eden and cast them into exile, and thus they had sin. And ever since then, we have all been born with, what's called in the Bible original sin. So, and of course, as I said, Cain entered into a conspiracy when he murdered his brother by essentially trying to replace God as a human being who decides who gets to live and who dies. I mean, that's an ultimate conspiracy because really, as we're created in the image of God, only God decides, and we decide by use of husbanding our own resources and improving our lives as best we can whether we're going to live or die. And you know, the ideal is to live a natural life, to be born and live until you die a natural death. In that sense, we're all equal. We're all created in the image of God. But getting back to whether there's a grand conspiracy, not to digress too far. There is not a grand conspiracy, as I say, in the formal sense, in the sense of people hatching one massive conspiracy, but there is a conspiracy in the informal sense, in that you have like-minded people who obtain the levers of power and who are conspiring to work together to control the human race, to control the entire planet, to create a one world government. Now, when I say one world government, I don't mean literally necessarily a government as we conventionally think of as government, with a president and a council and a Congress and judges and all that. I think that generally speaking, those institutions have been left in place in a local sense. The world government has always been and is a much more informal idea. It is unelected, unaccountable, secretive people at very high levels who generally coordinate together and who control power and control money. And as such, they are de facto controllers of the world. They want to control the world for several reasons, as I say, just because they believe that they have some kind of a divine right to overthrow God and to be the secular rulers of the world. They believe they've convinced themselves that they are doing it for the good of mankind. And they want money, they want power, and they want to control wealth. And I think that this conspiracy is something that every generation since Adam and Eve, right up until our present day, has had to confront. And that there is a battle, a very quiet battle, between those of us who seek freedom and those of us who believe in individual rights, that we are created in God's image. We're all equal in the de facto sense on earth, or the de jure sense under the law. We're born equal, we die equal, we're created in God's image, and every life is valuable. And that we are the best shepherds of our own lives and of our own destinies to the highest extent possible, living in a society with other people, and that's balanced. And that the purpose of government, the purpose of power, the purpose of money is to serve us, to reflect our values, not the other way around. And then you have those who are, as I mentioned before, people who believe that they have some kind of a divine right. They're intoxicated by power. They believe in themselves to the point of beyond what is conventional for human beings. And they feel perfectly entitled to control other people. And every generation has struggled with this. Now, where do the nexus of this conspiracy lie? It's in three areas. It's political, it's economic, and it's spiritual. Political, economic, and spiritual. The political conspiracy is to control the levers of governmental power without being seen as doing so, by getting their own people in positions of power, through subterfuge usually, by eliminating people who stand in the way of their power, through things like assassination or impeachment or discrediting, or however they go about it. They neutralize people. They control the means of communication to enough of a degree, or they try to, that they can use and marshal those forces to conduct their agenda, whether it be to destroy a person or whether it be to build a person up. I'll give you a recent example. Barack Hussein Obama. Who is he? Who was he? He came out of nowhere. Jimmy Carter is another example. These people were local figures who indicated that they were willing to play ball with the conspiracy, as it were, and I mean that term loosely, to basically move power into the hands of unelected officials. And to play ball in terms of merging the United States as a sovereign nation into an informal world order. They let these people know this and that they would be willing tools and willing participants in this agenda. So all of a sudden, they are built up out of nowhere into these national figures, these cult figures, actually. And, in most cases, and I think Barack Obama is actually a better example of this, the guy was an empty suit, right? I mean, he was fixing parking tickets in Chicago at the time of the 9/11 attacks and afterwards. He was a local state representative. I'm not saying this to criticize him. He was ambitious. And he let it be known that he was willing to be this new leader, and thus he was elected by actually a fairly large plurality of conservatives as well as liberals, and he became president of the United States, and as such he was able to conduct his presidency in a way that was in the interests of these globalist powers. Now, I'm not criticizing everything about him. I think there was some very good things about him. It could have been worse. And I also do think that there was a benefit, frankly, in the fact that he was the first openly African American president. That is inspiring because that shows that regular working people, at least the image, even though he was not that, regular working schleps, people like myself, people like maybe you, the listener, can have and wield government power. That's the whole American ideal, that we're a nation of citizens and we're self-governing. He represented that in image, even though that was not the truth. In fact, Donald Trump is much more of that in reality, which is why there is a conspiracy to take him out, one that recently had a major failure. So you have the building up, and then, of course, you have the removal of leaders who either started out as part of the conspiracy and then betrayed it, like I think John F. Kennedy did, or people like Donald Trump, who was never a part of it, who stood on his own as a self-made businessman and who said, look, I have had a life of great success financially, personally, I'm famous, I have all the things that anyone could dream of having in life, and I'm reaching the age where I'd like to give something back to my country. So I'm going to serve as president, and he is doing that. And so he's not corrupted. He can't be bought. A lot of these people are compromised by stuff they have in the closet, stuff that they're blackmailed. A good example of that historically was Woodrow Wilson. They if they step off the reservation, they can be destroyed, and they know it, so they play ball. And that's how the political conspiracy operates. Of course there's conspiracies, by the way. Let me just digress here a little bit. This whole idea that there's no conspiracy, that the idea that people who talk about conspiracy are nuts, that's ridiculous. There are, of course, conspiracies all the time. We can assume that there's constant conspiracies. That's why the Founding Fathers ensured with the First Amendment that we would have freedom of speech, freedom of press, the right to assembly, so that we can examine and expose conspiracy. The whole job of the journalism is to investigate and expose conspiracy. We all know there are criminal conspiracies, murders, rapes, robberies, assaults. I mean, those are criminal conspiracies. Bank conspiracies. Bernie Madoff was involved, for example, in a massive criminal conspiracy. There's no question about that. He ripped off hundreds of millions of dollars from investors, and he was consciously and wittingly engaging in a criminal conspiracy. So why would they think there aren't political conspiracies, right? Of course there are. Just like, wherever you have something that is desirable or powerful, whether it be money or whether it be political control, there's going to be conspiracies because people want that power. They want that money, so they're willing to engage in underhanded means to get it. They're willing to, get together with other people, which is what conspiracy means, conspire, and figure out ways to get the money or get the power and to work with each other. And they convince themselves that they're doing something right. Look, when somebody guns down someone on the street, like a mafioso, does a hit. The moment that he does the shooting, he has convinced himself that he's doing something good. Otherwise, he couldn't do it. So, yes, there are conspiracies, and yes, they engage in a massive campaign of self delusion and public relations delusion so they can fool enough people into going along. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to do it. So, yeah, there are conspiracies. That's a given. We're talking here about political conspiracies to gain power and to exercise power as a way to move the people and the nation away from individual freedom and more under control. The whole communist idea is a conspiracy because nobody in their right mind would give up freedom, give up their individual rights to accept collectivist control. In order to become a collectivist society, which is the most unnatural condition a human being can be in, you have to give up faith, you have to give up family, you have to give up property, you have to give up the right to trades, goods, and services, you have to give up sovereignty, and ultimately you have to give up your own personal identity in order for that to work. So nobody in their right mind would agree to that. That's insane. So the people who have promoted that idea, going all the way back to really in modern times, the French Revolution and the Illuminati, but it goes well before that. I mean, Frederick Engels, Marx's capitalist business partner, talked about primitive socialism. So, I mean, this is the condition of man. This is what the Torah warns us about. You go back to this idea that people are merged into some kind of a mass shared brain, that they've become collectivized. They have forgotten things that make us unequal, like property or like love or family or loyalty, or that anything is sacred. Everything becomes equal. Everything becomes the same, and that this is an ideal. It's impossible to have that happen with conscious individuals. We as a civilization have come much too far to go back to those primitive ideas. So they use conspiracy to promote that. That's why they were able to have victories and win the Russian coup against the revolution, where people thought they were getting more freedom, but in fact they ended up with a communist regime that was the most bloody and the most violent and most brutal in the history of this planet. The Nazis were involved with the same type of conspiracy to collectivize people based on national identity, hyper-nationalism, the belief in the nanny state, that the Nazi state would take care of all aspects of life. All of them require a massive marketing campaign done in secret, so thus it is a conspiracy. And also all of them require the establishment of an enemy, somebody that they can do this dialectic with. It's us against them. We have to defeat them in order to create this new man. In the case of the communist conspiracy, that enemy is private owners, business people, capital, people of faith. In the case of the Nazis, the enemy was the Jews. So they all pick some sort of enemy, and then they go to war against that enemy as a way of galvanizing people. I think that it was Henry Adams, the grandson of John Quincy Adams, who was a culture critic, late 19th century, wrote a book called The Education of Henry Adams, where he observed, and I'm paraphrasing, that politics is all about the organization of hatreds. And that's what they do. They create a dialectic by organizing hatreds. The dialectic is the tool and is the method of this mass conspiracy. So that's the political conspiracy. What about the economic conspiracy? The economic conspiracy, in my opinion, has to do with who controls the currency of a nation. Every nation, every civilization must have some form of money. We can't function as human beings without money. We'd be dead without money. We can't possibly have a system of barter in the literal sense, because we don't have something we can use to barter. If you want to go out to lunch this afternoon, are you going to go into a restaurant and say, I'll give you, I don't know, I make baskets. I'll give you one of my baskets in exchange for lunch. Well, the restaurant may not want baskets. In other words, you can't barter. Barter can play a role in an economy, and does and should, to the degree that it's natural. But ultimately, in order for an economy, in order for a household, and the word economy comes from the Greek word ekonomos, which means household. So we can reduce it down to its simplest unit. In order for a household to function, they need some kind of an abstract means of exchange. They can't just exchange the goods and the services that that particular household provides. It's not adequate. So man has to invent money. All right, even the most primitive societies have money. If you look at the Papua New Guinea people living in the outback of New Guinea, who are still, some of them are still into cannibalism, they have some kind of money, whether it be beads or whether it be stones or whether it be some kind of an object that everybody agrees has value. And that object is thus imbued with some value that everyone agrees to. The amount of the value depends upon what people also agree to. Thus, we have denominations of money, whether it be $1, $10, $20, etc. So money is something that is an abstract means of exchange. It is a means of storing value, which is to say that your work, your labor is a value. It's an abstract value, but it's your time. If you go to a shift and you work an 8-hour shift, you have given 8 hours of your precious life to benefit someone else, to benefit the company you work for. In exchange, that company gives you an abstract value, money. And that money has a set value that is agreed upon by yourself and your employer. And the money is a storage of wealth. It's not a tangible wealth, it's an abstract wealth. And you can have that and use that later or at the time or whenever you want to then turn it into some other value, whether it be a mortgage so you can own a home, whether it be a new car, whether it be education, whether it be lunch, whatever it is. You have the ability to take that abstract value and convert it back into a tangible value. That's how money works. It's a convertible value. It's both abstract then tangible, then abstract then tangible. And you need to have that in order for a society to function. So money serves two purposes. It's an abstract means of exchange, and it is an abstract storage of value. And as such, money has to be neutral. It has to reflect the needs of a given society. If a society has a large level of production, there's a lot of activity, people want to buy and sell stuff, people are making stuff, people are taking raw property and they're turning it into a garden, suddenly it has value. People that want to take the vegetables they've grown and they want to not just consume them, but offer them to other people in exchange for money as an abstract value. All of these transactions make up what's called the gross domestic product, and all of them, and the level of a gross domestic product of an economy, of a nation, is how much money that nation needs to create so as to effect those transactions neutrally. Where the conspiracy enters into the picture is when a nation doesn't create their money through simply the neutral issuance of currency, whether that currency be gold or whether it be paper money. I actually think that there's a lot to be said for paper money. I'm not into gold. I don't believe in the gold standard because gold is a commodity and it's a separate matter and it can be manipulated by people who control the gold. And there has to be some gold in a currency. But if you issue paper money on the good faith and credit of a nation, and that paper money is issued neutrally by the nation, by the Treasury, either directly in terms of payment to services or through loans with very, very tiny amount of interest that goes to improve the national condition, then you have honest money. And if the government issues too much money, then there's going to be an inflation and they're going to be kicked out of office. If they don't issue enough, then there's going to be depression and there's going to be starvation and they'll be kicked out of office. So the science of the economist is to determine exactly how much money needs to be issued at any given time, and to make sure that that money is issued debt free. Then banks can make money by lending it if they have deposits on hand. Uh, Financiers can make money. Everybody can make money from their own effort, from their own ability to in, produce goods and services, from their own imaginations. But what we have instead is an informal conspiracy because our money is not created neutrally. Our money is created as a debt, and that debt is paid to bankers and investors who are informally, whether they know it or not, they're engaged in an economic conspiracy. All right? It's a complicated subject. It is completely unconstitutional, by the way, because our Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, says that Congress shall regulate the value of coin, shall issue coin and regulate the value thereof, which means coin is just a euphemism for money. And Congress decides, our elected officials decide how much money should be issued, and they should issue it from the Treasury. It's been a struggle going back to every administration, including this administration, to try to control the nation's money in the name of the people. Andrew Jackson was one of the great heroes of this movement in that he destroyed the private money issuers, the second bank, and he put that responsibility into the U.S. Treasury, which resulted in a golden age of the American currency. We have lost that with the creation of the Fed in 1913. We now again have a debt instrument. And that debt, which is up to $500 billion a year, is paid to these bankers and these investors, both domestically and internationally. That's an economic conspiracy, I would suggest. And that same amount of money, can you imagine what we could do as a sovereign people with that money? What we could do in terms of improving the lives of our citizens, of lowering the cost of health care, of improving the ability of people to get out of poverty, to invest it in good endeavors. If the government issued the money directly with a tiny bit of interest, they could use that interest on a state level, I would prefer, to pay for infrastructure. We wouldn't have all these rotting roads and bridges, and it would be done debt free. Anyway, it's a big subject. Suffice it to say that the second spoke on the wheel of conspiracy is economic control of money itself. Not of money earned, not of money inherited. Those are things that are free. I'm talking about the actual literal money, the issuance of the money, and charging interest on that interest to the taxpayer, to the American citizen, putting a lien on our lives, putting a lien on our property and on our future. That is a conspiratorial system. It has been in place now in this country since 1913, and it's something that we ought to understand. Now, the third spoke on the conspiracy wheel is the spiritual conspiracy, the war against religion, the war against God, the idea that man is the center of the universe, that man decides what is true and what is not true, what is real and what is not real. And this is the sin of the Garden of Eden. And the manifestation of that conspiracy has been a concerted effort over many centuries, going back again to the French Revolution, not to bring that out, to undermine belief in God. It has been an attack on Christianity. It's been an attack on Judaism, which has been much more severe than the attack on Christianity, I would argue. The conspiracy against Judaism within began with the false messiah Shabtai Zvi in 1666. I've gotten into this in previous programs. It's too much to get into right now. But the point is that the corruption that occurred within Judaism has practically destroyed Judaism. I think the Judaism we have today is severely compromised by that spiritual conspiracy that was begun that year. Our belief in God, our belief that the Lord God, King of the universe, is the creator, is the lawgiver, has been seriously compromised. There are other agendas that have tried to destroy religion. One of the biggest is the Darwinian theory. That was an establishment theory. I think that the idea that man was not created in God's image, we did not descend from one parent, but that we're just nothing more than a bag of bones that is evolving through mutations, that somehow we started in some, as Darwin said, small warm pond, and that after umpteen million years of breeding and slaughtering of the lesser members of the species, what they call the survival of the fittest, out pops a superior species, man, from the ape. This is a preposterous thing wrapped in the cloak of science, and it has caused a diminution of the value of every human life. It is the foundation of some of these population control agendas, these communist agendas, these Nazi agendas that have allowed the perpetrators to feel perfectly humane and right in their murders of millions of people because they're standing in the way of progress. They're standing in the way of evolution to the new human being. And it's complete crap. Anyway, so that's the war against faith, the war against spirituality, and the belief in a creator of the universe means that a divine source has created rights. It has created a moral and ethical premise and precepts that cannot be corrupted by the imperfect and corrupted nature of human beings. And that is the foundation of this republic. That is the idea that is enshrined in Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence. We're endowed by the Creator with inalienable rights. What do they mean inalienable? It means it's from God. They're not corrupted. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And it comes right from the Torah, right from the Bible, right from the book of Genesis. God created man and women, it says, by the way, in his image, which means that every single human life has both a physical but also a spiritual side, and that every single human life, thus, is of value, of infinite value, and is worth living. And it's an idea that was further promulgated in Judaism by the Talmud, which said that every single life is like a universe in itself, and to destroy a life is to destroy a universe. Anyway, I've gone on, I think, long enough today, but to wrap it up, let me just say that, yes, there are conspiracies. I don't know if there's a grand conspiracy, but there is a conspiratorial mindset that we need to identify, we need to study, and we need to learn about, because we have to confront it in order to preserve the freedom of our own lives and that of our posterity. Freedom does not happen naturally. Freedom does not grow on trees. Freedom has to be worked for. It has to be achieved. And it has to be done through education and through fearless moving forward into a better understanding of what is and what isn't, what is moral and what is not. Anyway, I want to thank you for joining me this afternoon. Charles Moscowitz. Check out my books. They're available at Amazon.com. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. I really want to see if I can build up my members for subscription. I do this program live as often as possible. You'll get special editions as well. It costs nothing. You can cancel at any time. Thanks again, Charles Moskowitz. Have a great day, everybody.